I'm Diego Cordovez.
Adam Schoenfeld.
Welcome to The Scoop.
Scoop, that's all we have to say. It's synonymous with excellence.
Brought to you by Full Tilt Poker. And we always say special guest, even when we don't mean it. But this time we have a special guest. A young man named Chris Ferguson. He goes by the nickname Jesus.
See?
There must be some Latin connection. And he's won the main event. He's won 5 bracelets. He's won the Heads Up Championship. And
let's just say he's been lucky.
But he doesn't really need an introduction. You've had many accomplishments, but most impressively, you've just dominated the Heads Up Championship. They've had it 3 times, the NBC Heads Up Championship. Runner-up, and champion. 16-3 overall record. So is this just a fantastic run of landing on heads, or are you the master of the Heads Up?
Well, no, obviously I've been very lucky. I mean, no one can have that kind of record, without getting extremely lucky. That being said, Heads Up is a game that I've really spent a lot of time studying.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked hard at my Heads Up game. Actually, I think when I first started working on it was actually back in 1989. I was actually playing on the internet on something called IRC Poker.
Mm-hmm.
It was like basically, in my opinion, the very first online card room.
These guys now don't even realize what it was like.
Yeah.
There was IRC Poker,
Yeah.
which was a very early version of internet poker.
It was all play money.
Yep.
You couldn't play for real money. Some people would play for real money, in that they'd crossbook. Okay,
Right.
we'll put our play money on the table. Now you send me $40 for every dollar I use, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Adam
Exactly.
still owes
And then
me
you-
hundreds from that.
Do either of you guys play there?
No.
Yeah,
And I blew it because I could be a Heads Up champion because literally years ago, I don't know if you remember, over at Phil Hellmuth's house once, you said that you used to play Heads Up on the internet. And he said, yeah, give me a call and we'll play Heads Up. And I was like, sure, but I never did it. And I would have learned a lot instead.
that would
Here
have
I
been
am.
valuable.
No, but you were doing it back
so
then. I
way
remember.
back then, I'd play, and the thing was, you could play like 300 or 600 hands per hour.
Right.
I mean, just like you can nowadays. I think actually back then it was even faster.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually all text based.
Right, no graphics.
You could download. There's actually someone wrote a program that you could download to make it a little more graphical, but I never liked that. All text based was actually really efficient.
Right.
You have your cards and the board down at the bottom, but everything else was running in text. You could see everything that was going on. It was really good. It was absolutely great training. That, and I think I do a lot of mathematical analysis of the game, and most of that it applies most strongly to Heads Up.
Right.
Heads Up can be studied much more rigorously.
Yeah, from a game theory standpoint, it's very hard. Game theory has a really hard time dealing with like 3-player games or anything more than 2-player games.
Right.
But 2-player games, it has a decent handle on.
I want to ask you about the Heads Up, the NBC Heads Up in particular, because on the one hand we hear a lot of people complaining that the structure is too fast, and perhaps there's some truth to that. But your success is sort of my counter argument to that, because someone can dominate this format. There must be a way to do it, so it is skill based.
In a sense, I mean, yeah, you can say the structure is fast. In a very real sense, the structure is fast. You play a match. I don't know if they average 2 hours, maybe not quite 2 hours. I think my match is probably average 2 hours. But think about that for the entire tournament. That means I played 12 hours, and playing 3 games in the last match. That means I played like 16 hours.
Right.
And 16 hours of Heads Up is hugely different than 16 hours of nine-handed.
Right.
16 hours of Heads Up, I'm literally playing hands for 16 straight hours. As soon as I fold, I get another hand. As soon as my opponent folds, I get another hand.
That's a lot of decisions.
And every hand matters, and a lot of hands really matter as opposed to a full table where most hands are a raise, take it, and no action.
So first
compare.
off, you're dealing probably twice as many hands or more.
Right.
And secondly, I'm involved in every single hand and not just like 15% of them.
Yeah.
So 16 hours of Heads Up to me is like, it's 32 hours of hands, and then plus you're really involved in every single hand. So it's probably a lot more than 30. It's probably like 100 hours.
One thing that's interesting is that small ball has really become more and more popular than ever. And even Heads Up, Daniel Negreanu, Phil Hellmuth, a bunch of guys play a real small ball where they limp when they have the button, keep the pot small, and you are not a small baller in that context, at least not in my experience.
Yeah, I'm not a small baller in that I don't limp, but I probably make smaller raises than most people. Heads up, I try and make it 2.5 times the big blind when I raise. If I'm going to raise, 2.5 times the big blind. If I'm not, the occasions that I fold, I'll just fold. But I'm never going to limp in. Almost never going to limp in.
Yeah, I saw somewhere you played Andy Block in the third one, and you're good friends with him, and I'm sure you guys have talked about heads up. And he said somewhere where, because the positional advantage heads up is so strong, you should always raise with every single hand. Now that may be taking it to a logical extreme, because once the other player adjusts, then you're going to need to readjust. But that's
I think that's too many.
There's too much to give up.
I think that's too many, raising too often. And I think the deeper the stacks, the more frequently you can raise.
Does he mean as opposed to
when you're
folding?
in position?
Never folding.
Right. I think he plays the same strategy. Oh, never limping, actually. He says never. You could never
fold.
He didn't play that strategy against me, by the way.
Well, that's part of the problem. You know what he knows, and he knows what you know, so you're going to have to adjust.
I think probably against a typical opponent, it might be right just to raise every single hand.
Until they start to adjust again. If they, once they figure out that you're doing that, then you've got to make some sort of adjustment.
Yeah, I think he's actually saying it wouldn't be a bad strategy, even if you just announce it to your opponent.
But it seems, and again, this may be just from a few observations, it seems that even with all the small ball, your strategy, not just in heads-up tournaments, but in tournaments in general, is that you are not necessarily the power poker, big ball, pre-flop, but that you're much more inclined to make the big move on the flop or on the turn and really put pressure on someone else to make a decision, as opposed to the kind of small ball, small bet, small raise.
I think I've actually changed my game a lot more toward the small balling. I used to be much more of a pressure player. Put pressure on the opponents, make them make the decision, make them.
Right.
The more decisions you give your opponents, the more opportunities they have to make mistakes. So I've always been one for putting a lot of pressure on my opponents. I've actually dropped back from that recently, and I think there are a couple reasons for that. First off, there's so many tournaments nowadays. In the old days, people didn't want to get busted in a tournament, especially like the main event of the World Series. You go bust in the main event of the World Series.
You have to wait a year.
Exactly, to get any kind of huge tournament.
Yeah.
Any kind of $10,000 buy-in. There might have been 10 years ago.
If you want to win $1 million prize, it was going to be another year.
You wouldn't come
shot.
So that pressure worked a lot better when people were scared.
Yeah.
Now they're not.
Now that they're $10,000 events all the time. You go broke, okay. Oh, good, I can cash my flight and I catch the next $10,000. I was afraid I was going to last too long and miss that one.
All right.